In daily life, everyone encounters specific challenges, and one of the most common and significant among them is interacting with so-called difficult individuals. These are people whose presence seems unbearable, who constantly exude negativity, whose words are full of complaints and criticism aimed at belittling others. How, then, can one build communication with those who make existing alongside them a genuine test? This fundamental question must be addressed, as encounters with such individuals are inevitable in any life context, whether in a professional environment, at home, among close friends, or within family ties. It is critically important to master the skills of effective interaction with them, for without it, their influence can be destructive. Such personalities possess the ability not only to drain one's vitality, but also to undermine emotional well-being, leaving behind a sense of emptiness and discomfort. Therefore, understanding strategies for dealing with them is key to maintaining inner harmony and protecting personal space. However, setting aside the intricacies of interpersonal interactions, let us turn to the ancient pages of history, where a captivating saga of the Vikings unfolds. Their astonishing journey began in the harsh yet fertile lands of Scandinavia, where the descendants of northern peoples had long engaged in agriculture, hunting, and, of course, fishing. It was the pursuit of fish that first led these intrepid inhabitants of the northern lands to the boundless waters, and for centuries, they honed their seafaring skills, ensuring their sustenance and survival. But as the end of the 8th century approached, something more than just a hunger for food was born in their hearts. The Norse gradually moved away from traditional fishing, setting their sights on exploring unknown, more distant horizons. Scandinavia, situated at the crossroads of maritime routes, became an ideal launching pad for daring sea raids. The surrounding waters provided the Vikings with unprecedented, easy access to the very heart of neighboring continents, and their majestic, awe-inspiring vessels served as the key to these distant lands. These legendary Viking ships, true technological marvels of their time, were the product of meticulous engineering, refined by the Norse for nearly 10 centuries. A revolutionary breakthrough in shipbuilding occurred in the 7th century when the Vikings made an ingenious discovery. They invented the keel, erected a mast, and for the first time set a sail, transforming their vessels into formidable machines for long voyages. Many of these astonishing ships have been discovered by archaeologists, and their detailed study has helped uncover the deepest secrets of Viking ship design and construction. The construction process was truly unique. Wedges were carefully driven into freshly cut trees, allowing them to split precisely along their natural fibers. The planks obtained in this manner possessed incredible strength and maintained their shape regardless of changes in humidity. They were then meticulously planed to perfect smoothness, achieving an impeccable fit in the so-called clinker construction, where the planks elegantly overlapped one another, like an open fan. Building just one such impressive vessel required felling up to 20 large oak trees. The ship's hull was rendered absolutely watertight by a special coating of animal hair, carefully impregnated with tar and reinforced with numerous sturdy iron rivets. Notably, Anderson, along with several dozen settlers, set foot on Icelandic soil in 870 AD. Their initial impressions of their long-awaited homeland were undoubtedly daunting. 2/3 of this barren territory were covered in lava and glaciers. The climate was severe, and winters stretched on, plunging everything into a long and dark night. The arrival of the Vikings caused alarm among the indigenous inhabitants of Iceland, the Irish Christians. With characteristic Viking resilience, Anderson's party settled in small valleys nestled at the foot of the lava mountains. The large-scale migration to Iceland led to a population increase to 30,000 people just 60 years after Anderson's landing, far too many for the limited amount of fertile land. A severe famine, which erupted in 970 AD, was so devastating that, according to one chronicler, the old and infirm were thrown off a cliff. The scarcity of food and habitable land created a critical problem. The solution was seen in the search for new territories located further across the North Sea. In 982 AD, the Viking Eric the Red left Iceland, taking with him 500 men, women, children, and all their possessions, and set sail across the waters to a land he named Greenland. This journey was extremely perilous, Out of 25 ships that set out, only 16 reached their destination. The reality was far from their expectations. Greenland is almost entirely located beyond the Arctic Circle. Then, as now, the climate did not permit agriculture. There was a severe shortage of basic necessities, too much iron and catastrophically little usable timber. Survival depended entirely on trade with Scandinavia, located across the sea. By 1000 AD, the population was estimated at 3,000 people, living on 300 to 400 farms. This small Viking community survived for 500 years before disappearing forever. In the cold storage facility of the Copenhagen Geophysical Institute in Denmark, history is preserved at a temperature of -60 degrees Celsius. Each of these tubes contains a Greenland ice core sample. Like tree rings, layers of ice accumulated over time, preserving the secrets of past eras. Answers to many questions about climatic conditions are found by studying the relevant section of the ice sample. To the naked eye, one crushed ice cube differs little from another. However, atomic analysis of the ice reveals extreme and seasonal variations in precipitation. In a special apparatus, heavy oxygen isotopes found in the water are counted. When their number is high, it indicates a warm climate. This spectrograph simultaneously evaluates over 200 samples. A complex series of calculations allows for the construction of a temperature profile and provides clues as to how a thriving Viking colony collapsed after 5 centuries of existence. Greenland's climate was significantly milder around 1000 AD than it is today. However, 300 years later, the territory suffered a sudden cooling, which is clearly visible on the temperature curve. This shift is easy to decipher. In 992 AD, Eric the Red's son, Leif Erikson, left Greenland with 35 men in search of new territory. Erikson was an exceptional navigator and became famous for discovering the boldest trade route between Greenland, Scotland, and Norway, sailing nearly 3,000 kilometers without seeing land. He then headed west. Erikson and his men eventually reached a green and leafy coast, a description many believe fits North America. Erikson's party returned to Greenland, and perhaps their tales of a mild climate and fertile soil inspired new legendary voyages to the New World. Where they went and how they got there remains part of the Viking intrigue, inspiring centuries of research and speculation. However, scientists have pondered a more practical question, not whether the Vikings reached foreign lands, but how they did it while out of sight of land. One possible answer may lie in the Danish National Museum in Copenhagen. Here, a tiny item in a collection of small archaeological finds is at the center of a new Viking debate, this time an academic one. Some scholars consider this would fragment an ordinary button, while others insist these marks hold far greater significance, believing they represent some form of indication by which a ship's position at sea could be determined. If this theory is correct, then a Viking Age navigator possessed a sun compass to find their way across the North Atlantic when out of sight of land. To this day, scientific debate persists regarding whether this device actually existed and was used by the Vikings. In 1889, a Minnesota farmer named Olaf Oman unearthed a large, flat stone entangled in tree roots. When Oman's son scraped dirt from the stone, he noticed stick-like symbols engraved on it, immediately recognized as a runic inscription. The stone was named the Kensington Stone after its discovery site and put on public display. It attracted the attention of several scholars, including one from the University of Minnesota, who was able to translate the Viking runic inscription. We are with 22 Norwegians on an exploration expedition from Finland to the west. We camped by 2 rocky islands, 1 day's journey north of this snow. We went out and fished. 1 day after returning home, we found 10 men, red with blood and dead. We have 10 men by the sea to look after our ships. 14 days, journey from this island. Year 1362. Families were generally large, often including relatives, servants, and slaves. Interiors were simple and functional. The central room served as both kitchen and living area, with benches lining the walls. Homes lacked windows, save for an opening in the ceiling above an open hearth, which provided the sole source of light and ventilation. Hedeby was a true crossroads of international trade and an exceptionally unusual place for its time. Its uniqueness stemmed from the fact that peace reigned there year-round. Equally rare was the religious tolerance, as Christians and pagans lived and worked side by side without armed conflict, focusing solely on trade. Today, the defensive fortifications that once protected the town are hidden by greenery. What was once a bustling metropolis has now become a vast burial ground. Like scientific grave diggers, archaeologists use a geomagnetic data logger instead of a shovel, a sophisticated system that measures the Earth's magnetic properties. Any change in the soil, whether caused by ancient foundations or broken bowls, is detected and recorded electronically. Based on this data, scientists create a soil profile mapped to the centimeter beneath the surface. Subsurface mapping is an extremely laborious process. Ground-penetrating radar provides an even more detailed view of the soil structure. The objects themselves remain undisturbed, preserved by the Earth. The accumulated data is stored and cross-referenced, allowing computers to reconstruct a map of Hedeby. In the lab, new discoveries materialize on screen. Slowly but surely, the houses and streets of the buried town come to life electronically. However, much of Hedeby is now submerged. Since the Viking Age, the Baltic Sea level has risen by over 11 meters, creating unparalleled conditions for the preservation of wood and other organic materials. Researchers are particularly fascinated by Hedeby's famous sea wall, a massive structure built in the 8th century. Now, there is only one way to see the once imposing barricade: descend into the water. A highly sensitive sonar position locator scans the surface of the harbor's silted bottom. A sub-bottom profiler is attached to the side of the vessel. Its sound waves reflect off the seabed, creating images of artifacts embedded in the mud. 13th-century-old relics are clearly discernible on screen. Underwater archaeology is a relatively young field of science. The submerged conditions of Hedeby Harbor are exceptionally favorable for preserving items that typically do not withstand the test of time. Today, the diver's task is to extract a section of the seawall. His challenge lies in the turbulent, murky waters and the silted seabed. This combination makes underwater visibility virtually impossible. In near-total darkness, the diver must grope for his target, a 1,000-year-old sea barrier. For researchers of antiquity, these artifacts could be an inexhaustible source of knowledge. These are planks that once formed part of a magnificent Viking ship, which archaeologists carefully extracted from Hedeby's silted demise. Charred wood found along the vessel's side serves as a crucial clue to unraveling the tragic story of Hedeby's fall. Captured by the city's attackers, this ship was intentionally loaded with flammable materials and then set ablaze. Afterward, like a giant fiery projectile, it was launched at Hedeby's palisade. The city instantly turned into a fiery inferno, leaving only a ghostly memory. Regardless of whether Norse seafarers truly set foot on the North American continent, one thing remained undeniable. In episodes like Hedeby's story, the Vikings essentially discovered something entirely new for themselves and the world, a space for trade and peaceful coexistence. Military triumphs were often followed by successes in the commercial sphere. Entire nations emerged from their interactions. Ironically, it was precisely during the period when their distinct culture reached its zenith that it seemed to dissolve, and the Vikings gradually transformed into Danes, Norwegians, Swedes, as well as Germans, English, or French. Today, all that remains of them are material ruins, unsolved mysteries, and, of course, runic sagas. These, pirate poets and warrior artists, that's who the Vikings were. The very word Viking still conjures images of giants, fierce warriors, and fearless seafarers, equally capable of great valor and barbarity. Their roots trace back to the Scandinavian lands now known as Norway, Sweden, and Denmark. The harsh, mountainous interior of their ancestral homeland shaped them from the earliest times as a people oriented towards external contacts. With the dawn of the Middle Ages, they began to sail their famous longships out of the fjords, keenly exploring horizons for fertile lands and new trade routes, while simultaneously striking terror into the unfortunate Europeans who stood in their way. For over 500 years, they rapidly moved across the European landscape, heading east, south, and west. The Norwegians, setting their sights westward, gradually advanced across the Atlantic, from the British Isles to Iceland, then to Greenland, and finally to the mysterious land called Vinland, located somewhere in America. Every schoolchild today knows that the Viking Leif Erikson landed in the New World long before Christopher Columbus's historic voyage. However, until recently, it remained unclear how the Norse managed such a navigational feat. Questions about whether they attempted to colonize American lands and how much of their unique seafaring skills they passed on to medieval Europe still await answers. The more I sail these small, completely open vessels, the deeper my respect for these people grows. They possessed incredible courage. They must have been extremely clever shipbuilders, skilled sailors, and shrewd navigators. Their organization must have been top-notch. Overall, they were simply fantastic, shares Ragnar Thorseth, a Norwegian adventurer intimately familiar with the marine environment the Vikings conquered. Thorseth dedicated the last decade of his life to building accurate replicas of Viking ships and sailing them around the world. We were interested in learning as much as possible about the ship itself, its seaworthiness, speed, and of course, learning how to handle it, to get a fuller understanding of how the Vikings managed not just to cross the North Atlantic once, but to do so regularly, 1,000 years ago, he explains. Ship archaeology is a relatively new field in the study of the past. Working closely with scientists from Viking ship museums in Norway and Denmark, Ragnar aimed to reproduce the original Viking shipbuilding methods as accurately as possible. What is truly unique to Scandinavian shipbuilding is the clinker technique. Most modern vessels have planks joined edge to edge, but Viking ships had them overlapped and then riveted together. Furthermore, ship construction begins with the planking, and only then are the ribs installed, whereas in most other traditions, it's the other way around. Thorseth's fleet consists of replicas of 3 vessels. Gaia is an exact copy of the largest Viking ship ever discovered. It was built around 850 AD as a warship and likely once belonged to a king. Oseberg, a replica of a royal yacht dating to approximately 800 AD, is considered the most elegant of the Viking ships. Its original was designed for sailing in sheltered waters and never used on the open sea. Masaga is an 11th century Viking trading vessel, which is arguably the most seaworthy of all 3 replicas. If I had to cross the North Atlantic again, I would definitely choose Masaga. But if I were to participate in the America's Cup, my choice would be Gaia. Beautiful, isn't it? The history of Viking expansion is inextricably linked to the characteristics of the lands they inhabited and the conditions that compelled them to move beyond their territories. Europe was powerless against this pagan horde, masters of axes and swords. The Vikings saw no reason to spare civilians, women, or children during their raids. Their southward advance reached Spain, and perhaps occasionally even extended into the Mediterranean. In the 9th century, they grew strong enough to capture London and besiege Paris. They colonized parts of Ireland, northern England, and conquered the city of York. Well, I suppose we've completely changed people's perceptions of the Viking Age in York. It used to be thought that the Vikings simply came and destroyed the city, but we've seen a different picture. They came and breathed new life into the place, building it with streets, private property, and churches, whose foundations can still be seen today. The land boundaries that exist 1,000 years later originate precisely in the Viking Age. So, the Vikings came as traders and merchants, and they brought new economic life to York. From the Faroe Islands, Iceland, and Greenland, their further sea path extended. During these prolonged journeys, they honed their seafaring skills, becoming true masters of the ocean. It is believed that the ancient Norse possessed the ability to determine latitude, skillfully navigating by a sun compass that helped them fix their position. In addition, they demonstrated deep knowledge of astronomy, understanding the movement of planets and the position of stars. For instance, they called the North Star the leading star, which invariably pointed them north. In clear weather, the sun, moon, and other celestial bodies served as reliable guides. Difficulties, it is presumed, arose during prolonged bad weather when the sky was obscured, and then seafarers might lose their way. However, it was precisely such disorientation that sometimes led to significant discoveries. The first person to see Greenland got lost, just as, according to tradition, the first European to reach Vinland, or America, deviated from his route from Norway to Greenland due to a severe storm. The primary source of information about these westward expeditions comes from two ancient sagas, which recount the turbulent and fierce lineage of Eric the Red. Their narrative of great discoveries is closely intertwined with themes of violence and exile. Eric's father was forced to leave Norway, accused of murder, and took his family to Iceland. Eric himself, also exiled from Iceland after several violent clashes and murders, departed in 986 to establish a settlement on the island of Greenland. Over time, this colony grew to several thousand inhabitants and maintained a lively trade with European countries for centuries. Greenland was a rich land, possessing numerous resources that were highly sought after in medieval Europe. Among them were both very prosaic goods, such as walrus hides used for making ship ropes, and more exotic ones, like narwhal tusks, which in medieval Europe were mistakenly taken for unicorn horns, attributed with mystical and mythical properties. However, the main trade product remained ivory, specifically walrus ivory, obtained from the tusks of walruses inhabiting the more northern waters of Greenland. It was in this form that tribute and various payments flowed to Europe from the Greenlanders. The Vikings continued their westward gaze across the Atlantic Ocean. According to this saga of the Greenlanders, Bjarni Herjolfsson, veering off course while attempting to reach Greenland in 986, accidentally sighted the shores of North America. He did not land, but brought valuable information about the new continent back to Greenland. Around 1000 AD, Eric the Red's son, Leif Erikson, decided to journey to the mysterious western lands to ascertain their suitability for colonization. The sagas recount that Leif's expedition first discovered a barren landscape framed by mountains and glaciers. Leif named this place Helgeland, which translates to flat stone. Modern scholars believe this was Baffin Island. Continuing south, they then landed in a forested area with a gently sloping shore and wide white beaches. They named this place Markland, or Forest Land, which likely corresponds to Labrador. Further south lay a third land, which they called Vinland, and it is around this name that numerous questions arise. The exact location of Vinland remains unknown, other than that it was somewhere south of Labrador. For many years, scholars have fiercely debated the veracity of the sagas and the location of Vinland, as well as the meaning of the term Vinland itself. It has been suggested that the name comes from Old Norse and could mean, "I found something new, surprising, I found wines and grapes." The name Vinland was given to the land by Leif Erikson and recorded in the sagas because of its excellent qualities. However, this has become a subject of academic debate, as many today seek to interpret it as Ein, with the stress on I, Vinland, meaning land of wine or land of grapevines. But in Leif Erikson's time, they seemingly had no knowledge of grapevines or wine. There was an Old Norse word, vin, without the stress, Vinland, which referred to pasture land. Indeed, for any Norse explorer discovering new land, the primary task would have been to find pastures. Their survival depended on the livestock they brought with them on their ships for the expedition, and their main priority was finding places to graze their animals. The Norse preferred to settle in lands that better suited their accustomed cultural way of life. Thus, in Newfoundland, they could hunt seals and catch halibut, which was customary for them. Furthermore, the importance of not delaying too long in their voyages was emphasized, as preparing for winter in the wild northern conditions was critical for survival. Life there revolved around hunting, fishing, and thorough preparation for the harsh winter months. It was in northern Newfoundland that definitive evidence of Norse presence was finally discovered. Norwegian archaeologists Helga and Stein Ingstad dedicated almost a decade to sailing along the Atlantic coast of North America in search of Viking traces. In 1961, their expedition reached Lance aux Meadows. Helga Ingstad was a renowned Norwegian explorer, and his wife, Anne Stein, was an archaeologist. Their arrival at Lance aux Meadows was serendipitous, where they met a local resident, Mr. George Decker. Dr. Ingstad inquired with Mr. Decker if there was anything unusual in the vicinity, hills or mounds. Decker replied that nearby, by Black River, there were indigenous encampments, and it was evident that these were remnants of old dwellings, although he, of course, did not know who built them. Indigenous people, Norsemen, or fishermen. It became clear that only archaeological excavations could reveal the true history of these places. However, Based on their experience working in Greenland and Western Norway, they had a strong hunch that this location was ideal for the Norse people to build their homes. The Norse presence on North American soil, long before Christopher Columbus made his famous voyages, approximately 500 years prior to that event, is now definitively and undeniably established at L'Anse aux Meadows. A logical question arises. How then could such a monumental and significant discovery have faded from collective memory over time, so that by the era of Columbus, the notion of sailing beyond the edge of the world once again captivated the imagination of European explorers, as if it were an entirely novel idea? The likely answer is that it was not erased at all. In 1957, Yale University acquired a truly astonishing map, dated to the mid-15th century. On its western edge, the island of Vinland was depicted. This was 400 years after Leif Erikson's legendary voyage and 50 years before Columbus embarked on his first expedition. If the authenticity of this map is definitively confirmed, it will serve as compelling proof that the reality of transatlantic crossings still remained in the European consciousness. Part of the extensive debate surrounding the Vinland map revolves around the question of its origin. There are suggestions that it was indeed obtained from a private family library in Spain, which may have been trying to circumvent strict Spanish regulations concerning the export of antiquities. Indeed, this map raised so many intriguing questions that a number of scholars sought a simpler explanation. They proposed it was a forgery. Thorough examination revealed that the ink used on the document contained titanium dioxide, a chemical substance that only became available in the 20th century. However, a mechanism was proposed by which this titanium dioxide could have entered the ink in modern times as an accidental transfer during the document's cleaning in the mid-1950s. For several years, tissue paper from certain manufacturers did indeed contain commercial titanium dioxide, the very material later found on the map. Nevertheless, there are strong reasons to believe the map is authentic. In the upper left corner of the document, a long, carefully hidden message in code, a cryptogram, is inscribed. The discovery of this cryptogram and its subsequent deciphering on the map strongly demonstrate that someone went to incredible, truly titanic efforts to include these encrypted messages in the inscription. It is impossible to create a cryptogram skillfully hidden within a text without immense and extremely painstaking labor. And just one change to a single word in that inscription could completely destroy the structure of the entire cryptogram. It is extremely difficult to imagine that a forger would go to such colossal efforts to include two cryptograms in two separate inscriptions on the map. If the map is indeed authentic, it serves as evidence that the Vikings did not lose their outstanding navigational skills in the years preceding Columbus's momentous voyages. Columbus himself was undoubtedly aware of the Vikings and their journeys to North America. It should be remembered that Columbus was born less than 50 years after the last Viking ship sailed from Norway to Greenland. It is also known that Columbus, as a young sailor, was in Bristol, which at the time was an important port from which many ships regularly sailed to Iceland and also to Greenland. Thus, Viking voyages remained a living tradition, an integral part of the maritime culture of that era. Some historical sources also indicate that Columbus traveled to Iceland. Therefore, he undoubtedly knew of the existence of land on the other side of the vast ocean. It was the Greenlanders who discovered, or more accurately, sailed to America. Greenland itself was colonized by settlers from Iceland. And when it is said that America was found by Europeans, this primarily refers to the Greenlanders who sailed from Greenland to the American continent. In a modern context, it is not customary to attribute the discovery of America solely to Christopher Columbus. Indigenous peoples, Native Americans, lived here long before the arrival of both Columbus and the Vikings. Thus, the Vikings were likely the first Europeans to reach North America, but it should be emphasized that they were here in a preceding period. Columbus, without a doubt, discovered America for Europeans in the sense that his voyages initiated large-scale colonization. In our time, it is too easy to underestimate the overwhelming power of the elements. Ragnar Thorseth will likely never forget how, in 1992, vessels like Valiant Merchant, Saga of the Cigars, and Elegant Royal nearly sank in a sudden storm. Fortunately, the crew survived to tell their tale. Wind and sails. This is the Viking legacy, their inseparable bond with the sea. How extraordinarily brave they must have been, pushing their open longships into the cold fjords of Scandinavia, setting off for unknown, hostile lands. These voyages, an epic saga in themselves, wrote a heroic prelude to Europe's age of discovery, making one wonder, will we ever truly know how much Columbus owed to his remarkable predecessors?